Well, welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County's Curator's Corner. My name is Thorin Tritter. I'm the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. Before we start, I want to emphasize that our building is open to the public, so please come to our museum and see the objects I'm going to talk about today, or some of the objects I've spoken about in other programs. We're open Monday through Friday from 10 to 4:30, and on Saturday and Sunday from noon to 4. If you'd like a guided tour, give us a call a week in advance and we can arrange that as well. The other thing I always want to say before I start my programs is that if you have questions during my talk, please use the Q&A window of Zoom and type in your question. I'll make sure to look there at the end of my program. As I have been sharing in recent weeks, I will share again today that we are starting a Buy a Brick campaign where you can both help HMTC and honor a family member or a friend or someone special through the purchase and placement of a personalized brick on the patio that overlooks our Children's Memorial Garden. I think an email is actually going out to various people today about this. If you're on our email list, you'll get that information. But I will also try and put a link into the chat window, although I'm not able to do it while I'm sharing my screen. So maybe in a few minutes, I'll put that up at the end of our program. But you can always give us a call and find out how to buy a brick. And one other thing I've been talking about recently, and I'll just remind you again, is that we are looking for sponsors for HMTC public program series, like the Curator's Corner programs or the Sunday with Survivors or 2G Tuesdays, a range of other program series that we have coming up. So if you're interested, please, we'd love your support. We greatly appreciate it. And just ask you to contact our Director of Development, Gail Peck, whose contact information is right there on the screen. Okay, I won't push further on that at the moment. Let me instead turn to today's topic, where I'd like to talk about this infamous symbol used by the Nazis in their persecution of Jews, the yellow star. This is one we display in our second gallery. And here is the caption that we include. Jews in Holland were forced to wear stars in public beginning on May 3rd, 1942. This version of the yellow star may look a bit different from the ones you are more familiar with. And that's because different stars were used in different parts of occupied Europe, Nazi-occupied Europe, and were imposed at different times. So the date is also relevant here. In this case, in Holland, the star was required after May of 1943 and 1942, but in other places it happened at different times. This is another star that we have in our collection, which may look more familiar with the German word Jude, Jew, in the middle, emblazoned in the center there. In this case, we know that this was a star worn by Julius Frohle, the grandfather of Howard Mayer, who was the second chairman of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. According to family history, Julius Frohle wore this star when he was detained and imprisoned in Dachau. Today, I want to use these two stars as a starting point for talking about some of the different stars that were used by the Nazis and about the requirements that were imposed in different countries. Let me start by just sharing some of the range of other types of Jewish stars that were used in other countries. You can see here, for example, the version from France, where the French word for Jew, Juif, was included in the center, and the somewhat different star developed in Czechoslovakia and in Romania. Some countries also turned to other identifying tools, not patches. So this is an example, for example, of a Jewish star button. You can see the two holes in it used as a button that was made out of an early form of plastic and used for a time in Bulgaria. And this version was the one used in Slovakia, which was a pin. Again, not a patch, but a pin. And one more example, this is an armband used from Croatia, where the letter Z was the first letter in the Croatian word for Jew, Židov. The idea of having Jews wear some identifying piece of clothing or an identifying marking can be traced back to the 8th century, at least, when it was ordered by Muslim leaders. Jews and Christians living under Sharia law in the 8th century were considered people of the book, whose belief in the God of Abraham predated the founding of Islam. And as such, they were accorded the right to freely practice their faith in private and to receive some state protection. In turn, they paid a special tax and were often compelled to wear an identifying mark to indicate their protected status. The design and the style of badges for Jews varied, as you can see here, with different policies over time. So the earliest we know of comes from the Caliph Harun al-Rashid in 807, who required Jews in Baghdad to wear yellow belts or fringes. Others followed, but we know that 300 years later, a written decree required that Jews in Baghdad wear 2 yellow badges, one on their headgear and one on the neck. These identifying pieces of clothing were not necessarily meant to be a punishment or the purpose of harassment. Instead, they were meant to clarify that the wearers were not Muslim, but had certain protected rights in these countries, in these areas. However, they also were used to publicly identify these people who were not Muslims and who the Muslim viewed as socially inferior. In the larger Catholic medieval Europe, those Muslim ideas appear to have gained influence. So we know that Pope Innocent III's Lateran Council in 1215 ruled that Jews of both sexes in all Christian lands shall be differentiated from the rest of the population by the quality of their garment. We're not exactly clear on what that garment had to look like, but there was some effort to separate or to identify Jews based on their clothing. And this appears to have been based on a concern about sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews and a way to prevent that. The Lateran Council's decision, however, was not applied uniformly across all Christian countries or at the same time. But the introduction of a Jewish badge or some marking did spread, and it mainly became used as a way to shame or humiliate Jews. 50 years after the Lateran Council's ruling, in 1274, Edward I of England enacted a statute that turned back to the use of a yellow patch design, declaring each Jew after he was 7 years old shall wear a distinguishing mark on his outer garment in the form of 2 tablets joined of yellow felt. You can see in this caricature from just a couple of years later, the Jewish high priest Aaron is portrayed with a badge shaped like 2 tablets of the laws. Another tool commonly seen in Germanic countries was not a patch, but the Judenhut, a special hat, a cone-shaped hat or headdress that was used to identify Jews. Here you see an image from the 12th century that shows German Jews with this identifiable hat, or another version, this from a printing of the 5 books of Moses produced in 1300 in Germany, that similarly identifies the Jews in the image by their hat. And you can find any number of these images of Jews with a particular kind of hat that are in paintings, in stained glass windows, or in various manuscripts. By the end of the 19th century, though, skipping ahead several hundred years, by the end of the 19th century, however, with the emancipation of Jews in Western Europe, the use of these Jewish badges or Jewish hats was abolished. That is, until the 1930s, when the Nazis revived the practice. But as I mentioned at the start, the Nazis did not implement the wearing of the Jewish star all at once. While signs identifying Jewish businesses were used during the boycott on Jewish stores on April 1st, 1933, there was no discussion at the time about making Jews wear a particular label. It was just a sign put on the outside of the store. Joseph Goebbels, the Reich Minister of Propaganda and Enlightenment, apparently came up with, or suggested, is the first to have suggested the idea of some kind of distinguishing mark for Jews in a memo he wrote in May of 1938, even before Kristallnacht. But no action was taken in 1938. The first decrees requiring Jews to wear identifying labels came after the invasion of Poland in September of 1939, when various German military and civilian authorities picked up on this idea. And here the use of the Jewish star was used to stigmatize, to humiliate, and also as a way to segregate and control the movements of Jews. The first major use of the Jewish star in Poland came on November 23rd, 1939, from Hans Frank, who oversaw the general government, a massive swath of occupied Poland that had not been annexed to Germany. And you see here a map that shows how in 1939, the western portions of occupied Poland, shown in purple, were made part of Germany, annexed to Germany, while the beige area was labeled the general government. Hans Frank was placed in control of this area, and in November of 1939, he ordered that all Jews over the age of 10 were to henceforth wear a Jewish star. His order also clarified that the Jewish star what it should look like, saying that Jews needed to wear a white armband affixed with a blue six-sided star, and that it should be worn over the right upper sleeve of a person's outer garments. And in one further insult to the Jews, they were responsible for making or purchasing these armbands. So the first Jewish stars ordered by the Nazis were not yellow, but were blue and on a white background. Here's a couple of other examples of those early white armbands. Even as late as September of 1941, at least in some parts of Poland, this blue and white star was still being used. This is a disturbing photograph that was taken in the Warsaw Ghetto by a Nazi photographer in 1941 that shows that blue and white version of the Jewish star still being used at that time. I think it's notable also, this really is a troubling photo for me, that even in ghettos where the Jews were isolated from non-Jews already, they were still required to wear the identifying symbol, suggesting the use was not only for segregation, but also significantly as a tool of humiliation and dehumanization. By 1941, however, the yellow star had also come into use in other parts of the German Reich. After the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in June of 1941, as the Nazis established ghettos that were precursors for the mass deportations to killing centers, the yellow star was ordered for use in those newly occupied areas. Although, again, different rules in different times and different enforcement. This is another troubling photograph that shows that even young children, like these two little boys, well under 6 years old, were required to wear a Jewish star in the Kovno ghetto in Lithuania. By the time this photograph is taken in 1944, the star had largely become a sign that the wearer was going to be murdered. Here is a view of the Jews in the Lodz ghetto in Poland, which shows another variation in the Nazi policies. I think you can make out that the Jews in Lodz were required to wear Jewish stars not only on the front of their garments, but also on their backs. So the first imposition of the Jewish star came in Poland in November of 1939, which was followed by the required use in other occupied portions of the Soviet Union in June of 1941. Then on September 1st, 1941, Reinhard Heydrich issued a decree that applied to Jews living in Germany and the annexed territories in portions of Czechoslovakia and Western Poland, that purple area that I showed in the earlier map. The decree, as you can see here, applied to all Jews who were 6 years old or older, and it declared that the star needed to be in black thread on a yellow fabric and include the word Jew inscribed in the center. Jews were not allowed to leave their homes without wearing that star, and the decree clarified there would be a fine and possible imprisonment for anyone who didn't do it. With this decree, the Jews of Germany were finally required to wear the Jewish star that had been used in the occupied territories to the east since 1939. The response to this order gives some insights into how, by 1941, Jews saw themselves in Germany and how they were viewed by other non-Jewish Germans. One response to the decree issued by Heydrich was a wave of suicides, as many of the German Jews still in Germany could not face the humiliation of the Jewish star or realized that the imposition of the Jewish star was a precursor to deportation and murder. And rather than face the uncertainty of when that would happen, they chose to control their own destiny. Another response to the imposition of the Jewish star in Germany was a surge of support for Jews. The sight of a Jewish neighbor who was forced to wear a yellow star elicited sympathy from many non-Jewish Germans. And that response was apparently widespread enough that Joseph Goebbels felt the need to speak out about the reason for the star. And he gave a speech in November of 1941, where he stated that, first of all Jews belong to an international conspiracy against National Socialist Germany and that they desire its defeat and destruction. He then explained that Jews were finding limited possibilities to do that, to commit that crime or destruction and to defeat Germany, because the German state had taken appropriate measures against it happening. And one of those measures was the introduction of the yellow Jewish star. He then said, we want to mark him, the Jew, externally, above all, so that he is recognized as a Jew at the slightest attempt to offend against the German national community. And then he used a very strange term, calling the use of a yellow star an extraordinarily humane regulation, a kind of hygienic prophylaxis to prevent the Jew from sneaking into our ranks without being recognized in order to sow discord. A humane regulation, a kind of hygienic prophylaxis. That to me is a very strange term. I don't believe he is referring to the regulation as being humane to Jews. Given that he viewed the Jews as subhuman, I don't think that's what he's talking about. But I think he means that the regulations served the humanity of the Volk, of the non-Jewish Germans. And his hygienic prophylaxis was based on the view that the Jews were a disease. And thus the yellow star regulation would help to cleanse the German people and thus safeguard them from this Jewish disease in the future. Even as Goebbels made this speech, an internal SS memo did not see sympathy for Jewish Germans as such an important factor, and instead noted that among the German population, the yellow star regulation had caused surprise among many who had not realized how many Jews still lived around them. The SS report, however, did point out a problem caused by people the Nazis classified as Jews, but who identified as Christians. Congregants in some churches, the report said, complained about having to sit next to people wearing the Jewish star. In response, some Protestant clergymen were considering creating separate seating areas for their congregants who wore a Jewish star, but leading Catholic clergy opposed any kind of separation. Regardless of these different responses, the Nazis did not see enough of opposition to the regulation to change the decree, and it remained in force in Germany after September of 1941. And indeed, the Nazis then expanded the use of the Jewish star in other occupied countries. They imposed the star in Belgium and in the Netherlands in the spring of 1942, leading to the creation of the star that I started my talk with, which is on display in our second gallery. And in June of 1942, German military commanders in France ordered all Jews over 6 years of age to wear a star on the left side of the chest with about the size of a person's palm with the inscription Juif inside, like one that I showed earlier. Many of Germany's allies also followed suit, including Croatia, the Slovak Republic, and portions of Romania. There were several areas, however, where local opposition prevented the use of the Jewish star. In Vichy, France, for example, the portion of France not under German military control, there in Vichy, France, the government refused to enforce the rule of wearing a star, fearing that the population would resist the imposition of a distinctive badge that would be forced on both foreign Jews and French nationals. Even after 1942, when the Nazis took control of all of France, the Nazis refrained from using from forcing the yellow star rule for fear that it would arouse resistance among the population in that southern portion of France. In Denmark, the Jewish badge was also never introduced. There is a much repeated, although apparently mythical, story about the Danish king, Christian X, who wore a yellow star in solidarity with the Jews. That apparently did not happen, but he did make a remark to his finance minister saying that if the Germans introduced the star in Denmark, then maybe everybody should wear one. And he wrote in his personal diary, when you look at the inhumane treatment of Jews, not only in Germany, but in occupied countries as well, you start worrying that such a demand might also be put on us, but we must clearly refuse such due to the protection under the Danish constitution. I stated that I could not meet such a demand towards Danish citizens. If such a demand is made, we would best meet it by all wearing the Star of David. In Norway, too, the badge was never introduced, although that may have been because by November of 1942, all the Jews in Norway had either fled to Sweden, were in hiding, or had already been imprisoned or murdered. And in Hungary, local opposition and resistance to the badge meant that no order was introduced until March of 1944, after Germany had invaded and ousted the previous government. Those few examples emphasize the power that people did have, the larger population, even under Nazi rule. And I can't help but feeling sad that maybe if more non-Jews had raised their voices against the discriminatory labeling of Jews with the Jewish star, like what happened in Vichy or in Denmark, perhaps the Holocaust would not have unfolded the way it did. There is one more aspect of the Jewish star badges that I wanted to talk about, and that's the way the Nazis used similar badges in their concentration camps. The first concentration camp, as you may know, was opened in Dachau in March of 1933. The Nazis then opened smaller prison camps, followed by Sachsenhausen in 1936, Buchenwald in 1937, Ravensbrück in May of 1939, and then a much larger expansion of the camp system after the opening of the war. Beginning in 1937, the Nazis developed a system of badges to identify prisoners in their camp. This poster highlights that colored symbol, the various colored symbols. And as you can see, they relied on triangles of cloth of various colors to mean different things. A red triangle denoted a political prisoner, as shown in that first column of the poster. A green triangle denoted a criminal, as seen in the second column, with blue, purple, pink, and black triangles for other groups in these camps. But if any prisoner, and I apologize for the blurriness of the image, but I wanted to blow it up so you could see it. If any prisoner in these camps was a Jew, then he or she was made to wear a second yellow triangle that was placed under the other one to create the shape of a Jewish star. And if the Jewish prisoner didn't fit into any other categories, they simply were given two yellow triangles to create the Jewish star. There were also some special badges, again, a little bit blurry here, but the Nazis developed these specifically to identify Jews who had been convicted of having relationships with non-Jewish Germans, which was outlawed as part of the 1935 Nuremberg laws. This use of a yellow star to identify Jews, which began in the German concentration camps in 1937, was the earliest example of the Jewish star that would become so much more visible after 1939. And those who were aware of the initial development of a Jewish badge in those early camps, where it was used to make it easier for guards to single out Jews for particularly onerous punishment or to target them in other ways, the appearance of the yellow star on Jews outside of any prison must have caused a wave of fear. They knew, and others soon learned, that the visible labeling of Jews through patches, like the ones we have in our collection, was a precursor to detention, deportation, and murder. I'm going to stop there. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been informative. If you have questions, please type them into the Q&A window and I will respond. Before I get to them, let me just put in a plug here for some other upcoming programs. Next Tuesday, we'll be holding a program to remember Kristallnacht, the state-sponsored attack on Jews that took place on November 9th and 10th of 1938, which was a key turning point in the Nazi path to the Holocaust. This year, in an attempt to emphasize resistance, we are going to be holding a program with the author Jeffrey Sussman for a discussion about his new book, Holocaust Fighters, Boxers, Resistors, and Avengers. And I hope you'll join us for that Kristallnacht program. Next Wednesday, I'll be back for my next Curator's Corner, when, in honor of upcoming Veterans Day, I'll be speaking about a photograph in our gallery of an American GI, Hai Horowitz, who helped to liberate the concentration camps at Ohrdruf and Bergen-Belsen. And one more program to mention, on Sunday, November 14th, we'll be holding the next program in our Sunday with Survivors series, in this case with Holocaust survivor Anita Weisbord, who will be talking about her childhood in Vienna, her experiences on the Kinder transport, and her life after the war. As always, you can find information about these programs and a full list of our upcoming programs on our website at www.hmtcli.org, and then click on the events tab. And I hope also you will consider going to our website and clicking on the Give Now button, where you can either make a donation or buy a brick. And that's where you can find the information if you click on the Give Now button. Okay, let me take a look at your questions. I'll stop sharing my screen and see what's going on here. Were yellow stars mass produced so people and families could cut them out? You know, as I mentioned, the Germans made this the responsibility of the Jews in all of these areas to create and make and buy these stars. And so, as that picture from the ghetto in Warsaw, I think, highlighted, individual Jews did try and make them, and to turn it into a way to make some money to create those stars. There may well, I think there were other Jews who created mass manufactured versions of those stars, but they were made in various different forms, or many people just made them themselves. And so that's why you see a lot of variety and differences in the way the stars look. So anyway, thanks very much for joining me. I'm sorry I ran a little bit long today, but thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you at some of our other programs soon. Have a great day, everybody.